I never realized how thin walls could be until that night. Our apartment, charming in its old world, slightly cramped way, suddenly felt like a transparent box. The faint whir of Marc's voice leaked through the wall separating the spare room from our bedroom, and my ears, ever so tuned to the subtleties of our shared life, caught more than I should have. I was supposed to be cleaning up my art supplies, brushes, palettes, and paints that had become my therapy during endless nights of uncertainty, but my curiosity, my unquenchable habit of knowing everything happening around me, got the better of me. My hands paused mid-motion, smudging a streak of ultramarine across the pristine sketch of my wedding dress. My heart skipped, a jolt of panic at the ruined fabric, but it wasn't just the dress. That moment hit deeper than paint ever could. I had been obsessed with perfect details: the lace, the veil, the placement of flowers, the ideal dress for a wedding I thought represented love. And now, in one careless smear, the illusion of perfection collapsed in my hands. Marc's voice was still audible, muffled but distinct. I pressed my ear harder against the wall, partly hoping I would hear nothing, partly desperate to confirm what I feared. He wasn't talking about our apartment renovations, a guest list, or some innocent planning conversation. He was discussing numbers, contracts, and a brokerage. Astrid's laugh floated through. Sharp, competitive, triumphant. It was a sound I had subconsciously disliked for years, the sort of voice that made the air feel heavy and slightly dangerous. I froze as he spoke about selling my car. My car. The one I had used for years, the one I had joked about keeping forever, was suddenly just a line item in their master plan. A plan that had nothing to do with love. I felt the color drain from my face, replaced by a cold, lucid clarity. Marc wasn't just distracted. He was playing a dual life. My imagined life as a happy fiancé was a cover for something entirely practical, calculated, and manipulative. I sank onto the edge of the bed, brushing a sleeve across the ruined sketch, leaving another streak in its wake. The paint felt heavy, sticky, permanent, like the realization settling into my chest. All the small signs, all the unease I had pushed aside, now made sense. The dinners he forgot, the last-minute work trips, the casual way he dismissed my excitement about the apartment. We were never building a life together. I had been imagining a shared future while he had been calculating a financial one. The apartment felt colder, the walls thinner. My hand instinctively reached for my phone, but I didn't dial him. I didn't want explanations. I wanted certainty, proof. My chest was tight, but my mind was clear. I knew one thing with a precision that scared me. I would not be used as collateral in someone else's ambition. I would not be the unsuspecting partner in a plan I never agreed to. The ruined sketch in my hands was no longer a symbol of failure. It was my rebirth. Every smear, every unintended stroke, reminded me that perfection was an illusion. I could no longer continue the way I had, blind to the reality of Marc's manipulations. The night had stripped away the fog, leaving me fully awake, alert, and painfully aware of every truth. I glanced at the wall again, hearing their voices fade into a comfortable silence. My next step was certain. I would confront reality head-on. The damaged dress, the ruined sketch, was not the end of my story. It was the first act of my awakening. And for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Power. Real, unfiltered, and ready to take action. The next morning, I woke with a restless energy I couldn't name. The smudged sketch of the dress lay on the table like a talisman of truth, a reminder that nothing was as it seemed. Marc was out. He always had a way of slipping into the world without leaving traces, but I didn't need him to be present. His absence was almost irrelevant. I already knew enough. I decided to wander around our shared apartment, pretending to tidy up, but really, I was listening. The walls, paper-thin as ever, seemed to pulse with every sound. The faint clicks of Marc's laptop from the spare room, the soft shuffle of papers, the distant hum of the radiator, they all carried meaning now. My senses were heightened in a way that made the entire apartment feel like an eavesdropping device of its own. I crouched by the doorway, just far enough to feel invisible, and pressed my ear to the wall. Marc's voice, soft but deliberate, floated through, followed by Astrid's unmistakable, crisp tone. "I just need the final contract signed," Astrid said, and my stomach sank. "Then we'll have enough to buy our own brokerage. No more waiting, no more compromises." Marc's voice carried a practiced calm. "It's all on schedule. Camille is selling her car next week for the wedding fund. That cash will finalize our down payment." I felt my chest tighten, a mixture of fury and disbelief. The wedding fund. The car I had been proud to save for. The tiny nest egg I had imagined was ours to invest in our life. It wasn't ours at all. It was a line item, a means to their end. My head throbbed, not from confusion, but from the clarity of betrayal. Everything I thought was shared, genuine, and mutual was a facade. A carefully constructed mask for personal gain. Astrid's laugh followed, light and infuriating. "It's perfect. Everyone thinks you're the devoted fiancé. They have no idea what's really happening behind the scenes." I felt the weight of the truth like a physical object pressing on my chest. Every casual touch, every soft word Marc had given me over the past months now seemed rehearsed, transactional, hollow. I had been living inside someone else's scheme, mistaking it for love. And all the while, I had been complicit in my own ignorance, distracted by excitement and hope, blind to reality. I rose slowly, pacing the bedroom, as fragments of moments came together. His laughter at my jokes, the way he feigned excitement for our wedding planning, the subtle dismissals of my concerns. They weren't coincidences. They were part of a larger design. And Astrid, she was the axis around which this deception rotated. Her presence, once background noise in Marc's professional life, now felt like a blade cutting through everything I believed. I returned to the ruined sketch, tracing the indigo streaks with my finger. The paint was sticky, imperfect, yet it symbolized something more. Just as the paint couldn't be unapplied, the truth couldn't be hidden. I had seen it, heard it, understood it. My emotional landscape was forever altered. I made a decision then, firm and unwavering. This betrayal, this financial manipulation would not define me. Marc would not walk through life thinking he could use me as leverage. I would reclaim what was mine, my agency, my resources, my life. And I wouldn't do it with anger alone. I would be strategic, deliberate, precise. Every move I made would be rooted in clarity, not blind rage. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt a flicker of hope. Not from him, not from the dream of a perfect wedding, but from the realization that I was fully awake, fully capable. The walls around me, once thin and fragile, now felt like boundaries I could navigate with intent. I could plan, I could act, and I could protect what truly belonged to me. And perhaps, somewhere down the line, I could allow trust to exist again, not with Marc, not with Astrid, but with someone who valued honesty as fiercely as I did. The smudged sketch stayed on the table, a reminder that rebirth often comes disguised as ruin. And I would use that ruin to build a new foundation, one that no one could manipulate, no one could control, and no one could betray. The morning light filtered through our cracked blinds, illuminating the faint paint smears on the floor and the ruined sketch on the table. I stood there, breathing slowly, trying to convert the shock of last night into a clear, practical plan. Panic and grief had no place here. This was the moment where strategy met emotion, a rare opportunity one refused to waste. I started by cataloging everything I knew. Marc had manipulated our finances, used my contributions as a stepping stone for his clandestine business dealings, and allowed Astrid to insert herself into the center of our lives. Every smile, every casual gesture from him now felt like a rehearsed scene from a play I hadn't auditioned for. And yet, I wasn't just a victim. I had proof. I had the evidence of his voice, his planning, his indiscretions. I walked through our apartment slowly, retracing every step I had taken over the past weeks. Each corner, each drawer, each item I had thought was personal and safe now seemed suspect. It was a strange thrill, like being both detective and architect of my own liberation. The key was patience. One wrong move, and Marc could manipulate the situation further, perhaps even remove his tracks. I couldn't let that happen. I paused by the sketch. The paint streaks had dried, hardened into permanent reminders of the night's revelations. I traced the smear with my fingertip again. It was messy, chaotic, but it wasn't meaningless. Just like that ruined dress, my life wasn't destroyed. It had merely changed form. The rawness of the sketch mirrored the clarity I now had in my mind. Every plan I made would be deliberate, precise, and rooted in undeniable truth. I checked the calendar on my phone, mentally overlaying Marc's known meetings and appointments. I had learned from last night that he trusted secrecy and the chaos of routine. He assumed that I was occupied, distracted, and compliant. That assumption was about to be his downfall. I started compiling a mental list of allies, people who had knowledge of Marc and Astrid's dealings. Dean, my brother, was the first. Victor, his close friend, was the second. Both were loyal, both had a keen sense for justice, and both had the physical and emotional presence to act decisively. I didn't need a confrontation rooted in anger. I needed precision. Timing would be everything. While I organized my thoughts, I allowed myself brief flashes of what I wanted next, not just the dismantling of Marc's manipulation, but the reclamation of my peace. I imagined a life where I could invest in my creativity without fear of someone using it as collateral. I pictured the smile of someone I could trust unconditionally, someone whose integrity matched my own. That vision fueled my resolve. By midday, I had a plan. First, gather every shred of financial and logistical evidence I could access. Bank statements, emails, receipts, property deeds. Second, involve Dean and Victor, ensuring that their intervention would be protective, not vengeful. Third, confront Marc indirectly, presenting irrefutable evidence through controlled channels, leaving him no room for manipulation or deception. Each step had to be choreographed, flawless, unavoidable. I couldn't deny a spark of excitement at the prospect, not from revenge alone, but from agency. The idea that I could take chaotic betrayal and turn it into a meticulously executed strategy was intoxicating. For so long, I had been complicit in my own suppression, letting fear of conflict and the comfort of routine dull my instincts. That ended today. I spent the afternoon preparing. My laptop was open, spreadsheets and files arranged with exacting care. Phone calls were scheduled, messages drafted but unsent. Every detail, every potential countermeasure had been considered. The ruined sketch sat beside me as a visual anchor, reminding me that sometimes destruction was the catalyst for clarity. As evening approached, I allowed myself a quiet, private affirmation. I was awake. I was aware. I was capable. And no one, no Marc, no Astrid, no circumstance, would dictate the trajectory of my life ever again. The night would bring action, but for now, I let the calm determination settle over me like armor. I wasn't just surviving the betrayal. I was preparing to reclaim everything that had been denied to me. And I knew that in this process, I was rediscovering something far more valuable than any wedding fund or financial gain: my unshakable self-respect. The morning sunlight hit the apartment in sharp, geometric lines, illuminating the chaos that Marc and Astrid had left behind. I moved methodically, transforming what had felt like betrayal into a task with clear objectives. Anger could wait, precision couldn't. I had to know everything before acting. Every email, every transaction, every casual lie had to be cataloged. I started with Marc's laptop, ostensibly left in the spare room. He had been careless, or perhaps overconfident. Passwords were predictable, little personal patterns he had assumed were private. I accessed his financial spreadsheets, noting transfers that coincided with our wedding fund, seeing the flow of money into accounts he had never disclosed. Each entry was a thread, and I intended to unravel the entire tapestry. As I worked, I recalled the faint laughter I'd heard through the thin walls the night before. It had been casual, easy, as though our lives were a stage for someone else's amusement. The memory stung, but I turned it into fuel. My resolve was sharpening, focusing like a laser. If I could map every financial and logistical connection between Marc and Astrid, I could expose the network of manipulation they had built. I moved on to the apartment's shared spaces. Photographs, receipts, notes, all seemingly innocuous, were now pieces of the puzzle. A receipt from a high-end boutique in a neighboring city. A hotel key card tucked in an old envelope. Each clue reinforced what I already knew. The wedding fund had been a convenient cover for a private enterprise benefiting both Marc and Astrid. The intimacy they had claimed with each other had nothing to do with me, and everything to do with opportunity. I paused, letting the weight of that realization settle. It was simultaneously liberating and terrifying. Liberating because the web of deceit was now visible, concrete, undeniable. Terrifying because it forced me to confront the depth of my complacency. How many moments had I ignored? How many smiles had I misread as affection when they were transactions? I shivered, not from cold but from clarity. This was my rebirth, the moment I saw everything stripped bare. Next, I turned my attention to our joint accounts. Marc had assumed that because I trusted him financially, I would overlook inconsistencies. But I had a trained mind, capable of detecting irregularities in patterns of numbers and behavior alike. I documented transfers, cross-referenced them with the timeline of his supposed late nights at work, and noted every anomaly. Each discrepancy was a nail in the coffin of his deception. By mid-afternoon, I had compiled a comprehensive dossier. Every email, receipt, and transfer was organized into folders labeled for clarity: financial evidence, property and assets, affair documentation, communication logs. The neatness of the folders gave me a strange sense of control, a tangible reminder that I was no longer powerless. My agency had been restored. I considered reaching out to Marc, but dismissed the idea. Confrontation without leverage was dangerous, and he thrived on charm when cornered. No, this had to be a surgical strike. I needed allies, people who could act with authority and discretion. Dean was first. His protective instincts were unmatched, and he understood when subtlety was necessary. Victor was second. He possessed the skill and quiet intensity to ensure that the confrontation would remain safe, controlled, and irrevocable. As the day waned, I reviewed my work. The evidence was overwhelming, a fortress built from lies, manipulation, and greed. But I had mapped every path, every backdoor, every opportunity Marc and Astrid had relied upon. The fortress was about to collapse. I felt a quiet thrill, not of vengeance, but of reclamation. This was my life, my resources, and my dignity, restored and fortified. Finally, I set the laptop aside and looked at the ruined dress sketch again. Its imperfections were no longer just symbolic, they were tactical. The smear of paint was a reminder that chaos could become clarity, that destruction could pave the way for reconstruction. I took a deep breath, feeling the adrenaline settle into a steady, confident pulse. Tonight, action would begin. I was no longer the passive observer in my own life. I was the architect, the strategist, the unwavering force that would reshape my world. And amidst the planning, the calculations, and the meticulous documentation, I allowed myself a brief, private smile. Victory was coming, and it would be precise, measured, and entirely mine. By the time evening settled over the city, I had transformed from the woman who accidentally smeared paint on a dress sketch into someone who could map the entirety of Marc and Astrid's deceit. The apartment, normally a place of comfort, now felt like a command center. Every document I had gathered, every irregularity I had uncovered, and every lead I had tracked would serve as the foundation for action. I texted Dean and Victor separately, careful to avoid alerting Marc that I had discovered the depth of his betrayal. Dean arrived first, his expression unreadable, a calm intensity radiating from him. He set his duffel bag on the floor, not with tools for motorcycles this time, but with a discreet collection of devices, secure drives, lock-picking tools, and encrypted notebooks. "Show me everything," he said simply, and I did, walking him through my evidence methodically. He listened without interruption, his jaw tightening in measured anger at each revelation. There was no need for words of consolation. Action was the language we both understood. Victor arrived shortly after, his presence silent but commanding. He didn't need explanations. He had always been observant, and a single glance at the documents was enough for him to understand the situation's gravity. He moved with precision, organizing the evidence in a way that made it ready for legal and protective measures. I realized then how different this felt from being alone in my apartment, quietly piecing together the puzzle. There was power in shared strategy, in allies who respected skill, judgment, and discretion. We planned the confrontation with careful attention. Marc and Astrid had operated under the assumption that I would never act, passive, trusting, unaware. We would dismantle that illusion without endangering ourselves. Dean's role was protective, ensuring that physical safety was maintained if tensions escalated. Victor's expertise lay in persuasion and controlled exposure. He would manage Marc, guiding him to a confession that could be documented without resorting to chaos. I was the strategist, the executor of every step, my mind attuned to every contingency. When the evening finally arrived, Marc came home, unaware that his life was about to unravel. He greeted me with his usual casual charm, a smile that had once comforted me but now felt like a mask stretched too thin. I didn't return it. Instead, I motioned for Dean and Victor to follow me into the living room, where every document, photograph, and note had been strategically arranged. The room was quiet, the silence heavy with the weight of revelation. Marc's smile faltered. "What is all this?" he asked, voice tight, trying to maintain control. I didn't answer immediately. I let him absorb the sight, the evidence, the inevitability of exposure. Then, calmly and with deliberate precision, I outlined everything: the secret accounts, the diversion of the wedding fund, the shared apartment, and the orchestrated financial maneuvers that had masqueraded as ordinary life. I spoke in facts, not accusations. Each word landed with precision, leaving no room for denial. Astrid, summoned by Marc's hurried call, arrived shortly after, her confident demeanor faltering as she saw the files. Victor and Dean's presence reinforced the seriousness of the situation. There was no room for charm or manipulation here, only consequences. I observed them, noting the subtle shifts in posture, the tension in their shoulders, the fleeting expressions of guilt and panic. I had never felt more grounded, more in command of my life. Marc attempted a feeble defense, but every argument was countered by the documentation I had meticulously gathered. Victor guided the conversation, maintaining control while ensuring that no action could escalate into physical confrontation. Dean ensured security and observation, a silent pillar of strength. And I, no longer naive, no longer trusting blindly, was the center, the orchestrator, watching the world I had reconstructed take form before my eyes. By the end of the night, Marc and Astrid were cornered, not in humiliation, but in accountability. They understood that the game they had played with deception and greed had come to an irreversible conclusion. And I, for the first time in months, felt the liberation of being untangled from a life that had been anything but authentic. As the confrontation concluded and the evidence was secured for legal action, I felt Victor's steady presence beside me. There was no need for words, yet something electric passed between us, an acknowledgement of shared purpose, of loyalty, of trust earned in the heat of revelation. I caught his gaze, and for a fleeting moment, the weight of the night lifted. In that silence, I knew that safety, stability, and perhaps even love were finally within reach. The morning after the confrontation, the apartment felt impossibly quiet. The kind of silence that presses against your ears and makes you aware of every little sound, a creak in the floorboard, the distant hum of traffic. I'd never noticed the subtle rhythms of our building before. Now I did, and it was both grounding and strange, like waking up in a space that had finally acknowledged my presence. Victor arrived shortly after, without announcement. There was no dramatic entrance, no heroics. Just him, calm, steady, and reassuring in the way that people with quiet strength tend to be. We walked through the apartment together, inspecting the remnants of the night before. Files were organized, locks changed, secure backups established. My mind moved between meticulous details and fleeting moments of panic, old habits I had developed in the chaos of deception. Victor noticed my tension without me saying a word, his presence a kind of anchor that allowed me to breathe again. There was a soft comfort in his attentiveness, a reassurance that wasn't smothering but steady, like a lighthouse guiding me to safety. As we worked, I realized how much my life had revolved around others' plans and expectations. Marc's schemes had masqueraded as partnership. The wedding had been a facade. The act of organizing, of reclaiming control over my environment, felt like therapy. Every document put away, every lock secured, every corner inspected, was a symbolic reclaiming of my autonomy. Victor understood this instinctively, offering suggestions only when I asked, respecting the pace I needed to regain. At one point, as I adjusted the last file in my newly secured cabinet, Victor stepped close, his presence warm behind me. "You handled that beautifully," he said softly, his voice low and even. I didn't turn immediately. I wanted to savor the acknowledgement without losing my composure. "I had the right team," I replied, but my tone lacked the usual sarcasm. It carried a weight of truth, a recognition that the support he provided was more than just physical or tactical. It was emotional, steadying, real. He stayed near me longer than necessary, his proximity comforting, and I felt a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with relief over Marc or the apartment. It was something new. Trust. Stability. And maybe, though I hadn't yet admitted it to myself, a flicker of something deeper. A life not controlled by manipulation, but shared with someone whose intentions were straightforward, whose loyalty was unwavering. Later, we stepped out onto the balcony together, overlooking the quiet street below. The city was alive, but somehow distant, as if the chaos of the past months had been contained to this apartment and this moment. Victor leaned against the railing beside me, silent, and I found myself appreciating his silence as much as his words. "I think you deserve a fresh start," he said after a while, and I nodded, letting the idea settle. A fresh start wasn't just about moving out or securing finances. It was about reclaiming self-respect, about redefining my expectations of love, safety, and partnership. As the sun dipped lower, casting a soft golden glow across the buildings, I realized how much I had underestimated the importance of presence and integrity in a partner. Victor's careful consideration, his attentiveness to my autonomy, his respect for my decisions, it all felt revolutionary compared to the chaos and deception I had endured. The notion that someone could be both protective and non-intrusive was almost disorienting, but in a comforting way. Finally, as the evening settled into a quiet hum, he reached out and brushed a stray lock of hair from my face. The gesture was simple, yet deliberate, a tender acknowledgement, not a claim. I turned slightly, and before I could think too much, our lips met in a brief, gentle kiss. It wasn't passionate or overwhelming. It was measured, consensual, and filled with a sense of mutual understanding. The kind of kiss that said, "We're safe here together, and this is real." In that small, intimate moment, I felt a sense of equilibrium. The chaos of betrayal, the suffocating tension of lies and manipulation, had been replaced by clarity. I had reclaimed control, and in doing so, discovered someone whose presence amplified my strength rather than threatened it. The journey was far from over, but for the first time in months, I felt grounded. I felt capable of rebuilding. And most importantly, I felt ready to allow someone else into that reconstruction, not as a crutch, but as a true partner. The morning after the kiss, I woke with a strange sense of calm. The apartment, usually a battlefield of lingering tension and half-sorted papers, felt alive in a different way, lighter, almost mischievous. Victor was already in the kitchen, humming softly while making coffee. The aroma filled the room, but it was his presence that stirred something deeper in me. He turned as I entered, flashing a grin that was both playful and confident. "Morning," he said, his voice low and teasing. "Sleep well, or are you still dreaming about locks and paperwork?" I laughed, the sound a little shaky, a little liberated. "I think I dreamed about you," I admitted, letting my words hang in the air. He raised an eyebrow, leaning casually against the counter, arms crossed, eyes twinkling. Oh, he said, with that infuriatingly charming smirk of his. Do tell, or is that top secret information? I stepped closer, letting the playful tension between us build naturally. Maybe it's classified, I replied, keeping my tone coy. I could feel his gaze linger on me, the kind of look that's a mix of curiosity and appreciation, teasing and sincerity. The air seemed charged, every small movement between us amplified. Victor's expression softened, and he tilted his head, as if weighing how bold I was willing to be. You know, he said slowly, I have a habit of making classified things public if they're worth it. The flirtation was electric, but it was tempered by a quiet patience that had been his signature all along, protective, aware, and teasing in the most delightful way. As I poured myself coffee, I noticed the way he studied me, the small quirks I had long thought invisible to others. The way I bit my lip when focused. The subtle arch of my brow when I was amused. It made my pulse quicken, but not in panic. It was a warm, exhilarating feeling, like being fully seen and admired at the same time. He moved closer, and I could feel the heat of him near me. You know, he murmured, I think the apartment looks better when you're in it. There was no pressure in his tone, just a teasing honesty that made my stomach twist in anticipation. I rolled my eyes, though I couldn't hide the smile tugging at my lips. Better than Marc's chaos ever could? I asked, letting the edge of flirtation peek through. Victor chuckled, and the sound was low and intimate, vibrating in my chest. Way better, he said, brushing a strand of hair from my face, his fingers lingering just a moment too long. And you, he added, his voice dropping to a whisper, make everything feel right. I could feel the tension coiling in me, the leftover fear from past betrayals, beginning to unravel. I stepped even closer, daring, emboldened by the playful intensity between us. Maybe I'm starting to like the view, I said softly, letting the flirtation linger, testing the boundaries of boldness. Victor's hand brushed my arm, his touch featherlight but electric. I think I could show you a few more views, he murmured, his lips dangerously close to mine. The words were teasing, yet filled with promise. My breath hitched slightly, and I caught the glint in his eyes, the mix of challenge, desire, and genuine care. Before I could overthink, he leaned in, and our lips met in a slow, teasing kiss, full of playfulness and anticipation. It was flirtatious, exploratory, and deeply satisfying in its gentleness and heat all at once. I felt the tension of the last months melt away, replaced by a thrilling sense of possibility. This was different. This was real. When we finally parted, just enough to breathe, I caught his gaze, and he smirked. That was classified enough for you? He teased. I laughed, pressing my forehead gently to his. Maybe, but I'm willing to risk the disclosure, I said, my voice soft, daring. The flirtation hung in the air like a tangible thread, drawing us together even further. The rest of the day passed with quiet, intimate exchanges, shared glances, playful touches, and subtle teasing that sent my pulse racing. Victor's presence was grounding, but it carried a delicious electricity that made my heart soar. For the first time, I felt completely safe letting someone in while also daring to enjoy the thrill of the connection. By the evening, the apartment felt alive not just with light, but with the promise of a new, shared life, one where trust, respect, and desire could coexist. And in that quiet, charged space, I realized that my rebirth wasn't just about reclaiming control. It was about allowing myself to experience joy, flirtation, and romance without fear. The apartment was quiet, but charged in a way that made every heartbeat feel like an electric current. Victor was there, as he had been all day, his presence steady, protective, yet teasing, a combination I could never resist. The sunlight slanted through the blinds, casting warm stripes across the room, but it was him who made everything shine. I caught his gaze across the kitchen, and my chest tightened in anticipation. His usual calm confidence was softened by something more urgent today. There was a hunger in his eyes, a promise that had been simmering since our first kiss, the playful teasing that had become our shared language. I moved closer, letting the tension build naturally. My hands found his shoulders, brushing the rough fabric of his shirt, and I felt him respond immediately, his fingers coming to rest on my waist. The air between us was thick with unspoken desire, and I could no longer hold back the pull I'd been feeling for hours. "Camille," he murmured, his voice low, filled with need and something I could only describe as reverent. I leaned into him, letting my lips hover just above his. The world outside, the lies, the betrayal, the chaos of Marc and Astrid, fell away. There was only this moment, only him and me, and the warmth that wrapped us together. Then he kissed me, slow and deliberate at first, letting the hunger simmer between us. But as our lips pressed together, it deepened, igniting something raw and urgent. My hands tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, and he responded with a low growl, pressing his body against mine. The apartment, once just walls and furniture, became a private world of heat and longing. His hands traveled down my back, tracing the curve of my spine, and I shivered at his touch, a delicious mix of possessiveness and care. My fingers found the line of his jaw, brushing over stubble, feeling the warmth of his skin beneath my fingertips. The kiss grew hungrier in a way that left no room for hesitation or doubt. We stumbled toward the sofa, still locked in the embrace, lips and hands exploring, the playful teasing of before now transformed into something urgent, magnetic. Victor's touch was everywhere, yet never careless, every movement careful, knowing, yet full of desire. I pressed into him, letting the heat rise, letting go of the fear that had clung to me for too long. When we finally broke for air, our foreheads pressed together, I could feel the rapid beat of his heart matching my own. "You have no idea how long I've wanted this," he whispered, voice rough, almost broken with need. I smiled, biting my lip, feeling a flush of warmth that had nothing to do with the sunlight. "I think I have some idea," I murmured back, letting my hands roam freely over him, savoring the strength and protection I had craved for months. "And I'm not holding back anymore." He kissed me again, this time with a reckless hunger, one that made me weak in the knees, arms tightening around him. Each touch, each brush of skin against skin, was a promise of safety, desire, and mutual respect. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional, a declaration that we could trust each other fully and completely. As we finally settled, bodies entwined on the sofa, the heat of the afternoon sun mixing with the warmth between us, I realized that this was more than a passionate escape. It was a foundation. The fear, the betrayal, the chaos, they were behind me. In Victor's arms, I found not just protection, but a thrilling, electric love that was real, that was ours. We stayed there for hours, hands tracing familiar paths, lips brushing, laughter and whispered confessions mingling. Every touch, every kiss was a reaffirmation. This was the life I chose, the love I deserved. The stained dress, the ruined sketches, the lies. They were gone. What remained was truth, passion, and the promise of a shared future. Victor pulled me close once more, forehead against mine, lips brushing in a gentle, lingering kiss. "We'll build everything new," he whispered. I smiled, pressing back against him, my heart swelling. Together I agreed. And in that moment, I knew I was truly reborn, free, desired, and fiercely, gloriously alive.